Marjorie Taylor Greene, she was suspended recently from, I believe, was it YouTube or Twitter? We did a segment on it, but my brain is so bad that I can't even remember which thing she was banned from. Oh, Rand Paul was banned from YouTube. Marjorie Taylor Greene, it was Twitter for the third time, I believe. So she went on right-wing outlet here, and she's going to effectively double down on her comments on vaccines.
So this is concerning to me, and that's why I'm saying there's more research needed by the FDA before the FDA approves these vaccines. Because here's the problem, Anna. Once the vaccines are approved by the FDA, we are going to see the mandates for vaccines ramp up far more than they are right now. They're going to be mandated, and I fear they'll become law in some cities and some states. Biden would love to make it the law of the land. And I think that's completely wrong. Again, I'm not anti-vax. I am completely for people being allowed to make choices, medical choices for themselves and their families. And I don't think the FDA should approve a vaccine that it doesn't seem to be that effective, especially with COVID-19 raging all over the country. At least that's what the media tells us every single day. But I've talked to local hospitals here in my district and here in my state. Yes, the waiting rooms get full, but guess what? The waiting rooms are full of all kinds of things, not just COVID, some, car accidents, trauma, other illnesses, cancer, and so forth. But they're seeing about 30% of those numbers being COVID cases. So while the news tries to tell us the hospitals are slam-packed with COVID, that's just not the case. Everyone needs to get back down to common sense and remember that, we're human. We can't live forever. We are going to catch all kinds of diseases and illnesses and other viruses, and we get hurt sometimes. So I'm all for let's be rational with this. Let's be careful. Let's be cautious, and let's not turn into an authoritarian regime that forces shots in arms of people that don't want it.
I mean, there's so much to say about this. The last point about, we're going to become an authoritarian regime. Where were you when, the Patriot Act happened and the NSA spies on absolutely everybody? I haven't heard her talk much about that. That's pretty authoritarian. Where do you stand on the drug war, which locks up so many people for non-violent offenses? We incarcerate more people in this country than anybody else in the world. That seems pretty authoritarian to me. It's pretty authoritarian that our commander-in-chief can just wage war wherever he wants. Whether it's, the drone bombings in Somalia. There was no vote in Somalia about whether or not to go to war there. That seems pretty authoritarian, that the commander-in-chief has all this power and very few checks and balances, even though it's supposed to go through Congress, a declaration of war. Oftentimes, they just skirt that and ignore it. Where were you on that? Where were you on torture? Trump was pro-torture. Bush did torture. Or Guantanamo Bay. That's all authoritarian. Are you against Guantanamo Bay being open? Just use the buzzwords whenever it suits her own political ideology and beliefs. Now, by the way, to this point, I'm unaware of any government that is mandating vaccines for all. The federal government has not mandated every American get the vaccine. The federal government, I think they have mandated that federal workers, so people who are employed by the federal government, need to get the vaccines, and individual companies have made that decision. But this fear of authoritarianism, I don't really buy. And there's also a stretch. It's also a stretch when it comes to public safety and health things, because, you could argue is having seatbelts authoritarian? You're mandated by law to wear the seatbelt when you drive, because that is the government sort of telling you what to do when you're in your own car. I mean, I guess there's a stretch argument that that's authoritarian, but don't you think that's a little hyperbolic to use that term for that? Would it really be hyperbolic to, we talked about this in the context of the military. They've now, now there's a vaccine mandate for the military, but there was already a polio vaccine mandate, and measles vaccine mandate, smallpox vaccine mandate. So were all those things authoritarian? Were they already authoritarian, and now the COVID one is just adding this cherry on top of the authoritarianism? Or do you think those are not authoritarian, only the COVID one is authoritarian? I mean, I think it's hyperbolic, and of course she only limits this specifically to COVID stuff. Now, let's go through some of the comments. She said, waiting rooms are full of all kinds of things, not just COVID. Car accidents, trauma, cancer. I think she genuinely believes that, the emergency rooms are overflowing, but it's not really because of COVID. which is astonishingly stupid. I mean, that is just mind-numbingly stupid, because you don't hear stories about waiting rooms, overflowing all around the country when there's not a pandemic. It's only during the pandemic at various times that waiting rooms have been overflowing. You want to know why? Because of the pandemic, because of the illness, because of the virus. So I don't know. I mean, I think she might be dumb enough to actually believe that, no, there's been a lot of car accidents in Louisiana recently, bro. By the way, that's the state that I've been reading recently about how they're running out of beds because of COVID. I guess she really believes, hey, maybe there's just a lot of car accidents or something. Whatever. Oh my God, she's so dumb. So she said, this is something I hear on the right a lot. Now, the FDA didn't approve the vaccine. The FDA didn't give it final authorization, but they did authorize it for emergency use. The only reason why it hasn't gotten final authorization is because it's a very long process to get to that point, and hasn't been long enough yet. That's the only reason why. But obviously, all the evidence, all the data, all the studies show these vaccines work, and they work really well. They wouldn't have been approved for emergency use if that wasn't the case. They just wouldn't have been. So they omit that part, that it's approved for emergency use, to stress the latter point of like, well, it hasn't gotten final authorization yet. They think that's like a trump card in the debate where it's better to be anti-vax. And then I like how even she says, quote, I'm not anti-vax. I'm for people being able to make medical choices for themselves. Oh, you are? Okay, so are you in favor of people being able to choose whether or not to terminate a pregnancy? I can't hear you over your wrongness. No. They like to use that kind of choice rhetoric only when it comes to this. They don't use it when it comes to contraception or abortion or things of that nature. So the worst thing, this will be the final point on this, but the worst thing is when she says it doesn't seem to be that effective, because that is just factually not true. This really is a pandemic of the unvaccinated now. The numbers are staggering. If you're vaccinated, you have very sufficient protection, where you're very likely to not get COVID, but even if you do get it, you're likely to either be asymptomatic or have mild symptoms. So the breakthrough cases are really small. And remember, every time we talk about vaccines, the most important thing that we talk about is protection from hospitalization, severe illness, and death. Those are really the things that are important. And every single vaccine is well over 90% for those things. And every one, whether it's AstraZeneca, which is the UK one, the Johnson & Johnson, which is the single-shot US one, the Pfizer, the Moderna, even like the Russian vaccine, they're all over 90% effective against severe illness and death. So she just doesn't know what she's talking about. It doesn't seem to be that effective. That's just absolute nonsense. I mean, she's wrong. She's always been wrong on this stuff. It's embarrassing. But I will say, I really hope that YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and all of them stop banning people for just being wrong, because they've been doing that now, and it's getting a little ridiculous. Like, they banned Rand Paul. Now, Rand Paul made a lot of comments that were overreaching and dumb and silly, but they claim they banned him for saying masks don't work. But really, you had Biden's own advisor on this, Dr. Osterholm, who's an expert on the virus. He said effectively the same thing, that cloth masks don't really work that well. That really, top of the line is like the N95s, and there's a hierarchy of masks, and at the bottom are the cloth masks. So you can't ban Rand Paul for saying that, or just being wrong. And he was wrong about a lot of stuff he said on COVID, but YouTube banned him for a week, over that. So even though I think these people are wrong, I do think it's dangerous. I do think they're spreading misinformation. The only way you defeat misinformation is to engage with it and explain why it's incorrect. And they don't do that. They'd rather just ban them and be lazy. So don't ban her, but yes, let's play her comments and make fun of her ruthlessly, because she should be made fun of, because she's wrong about all this.